Hello and welcome to the Alexandra Wenman show. I'm very delighted to introduce you to my guest. She's a spiritual activist and author and has an amazing blog as well and a podcast. Hannah Wallace, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such an honor to have you on the show, my darling.
It's so great to be here. I'm really excited. I was so, like I said to you before, I was really happy when you asked me on.
I'm so pleased you could make it. Can you, for our viewers, just tell them a little bit about yourself and how your spiritual journey unfolded for you?
So basically, I'd say my spiritual kind of journey began really around the age of 12, 13, because I started being interested in yoga and more alternative stuff. So I was kind of the kind of odd one amongst my friends. And then when I got to about 17, I got very unwell. And while I was getting very unwell, I also was awakening more. And so it was very dark, to be honest with you, because it felt very intense. And I felt very lonely because I was kind of dealing with my body, not knowing what was going on, trying everything I could, but at the same time, having all these experiences. And that was nearly 20 years ago, which, as you would know, Alexandra, it was a very different time to where we're living now. So it wasn't kind of so out in the open. So I guess I was under the radar with a lot of that for a very, very long time. I kind of had it alongside in my life. And I went on a journey with my health for a very long time, for 10 years, until I got a diagnosis as such. But after trying from regular, it's the regular medical stuff to alternative, and anything I could get my hands on, anyone I was introduced to, I'd be like, I'll have a session, I'll do this, I'll take this from nutrition. And it got to a point where I just didn't know what to do anymore, because I was trying everything and I was thinking, like I said to you before we started, what am I, am I mad?
Something was up, didn't you?
Yeah, what's happening here? Like what's going on? And you obviously, our egos have these thoughts in our head. I'm not trying hard enough. Maybe I need to go down this direction. And actually what I got from not just my like kind of guides and the divine support, but it was a kind of a therapist who was very grounded. And she basically said, I really like you and I like seeing you because we have really good chats. But she said, I think you just need to like let go and stop all this, kind of like get off the wheel with this and start to live and choose life. And I believe there'll be a way for you to kind of navigate this. And that was quite a liberating moment. I didn't realize I'd been waiting for that permission almost, but at the same time, by creating that space, which is something I think we can all continually learn more from, space, surrender, that when we do that, we kind of call in the divine and the universe to work with us in a very different way, which led me to a very opinionated, non-spiritual, political guy friend who was on Facebook who said, I think you might have this particular thing called POTS, and I think you need to go to the doctor and speak about this. And at the time I was like, how do I go to the doctor when your mate on Facebook said, you might have this?
So how did he know about it? How was he
So
aware?
I knew him from like a chronic illness forum. And he, like me, was quite positive, and we would kind of chip in there and try and be of a guidance to some people to try and bring a bit of light. Even though he was very opinionated, he had some quite grounded approaches to things. So yeah, and he just said, and it was after that, it was almost like I took that on board, took what he said, and it triggered a series of events where I found out what was going on. I was able to kind of make a big shift because I realized, okay, this is where I'm at, this is what I've got, and it doesn't mean I just have to give up. Actually, I can choose to live in a way that I can align that with me. I can find grace. I can really integrate the darkness and light within me. I don't have to have that battle anymore. And we're always looking for the miracles, and in a way that was where the miracle was there, because it was almost like I'd stop the fight.
That is huge too, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was interesting for me because probably in a way on a kind of physical level, because I pushed myself in so many ways, I was almost a lot worse than what I was earlier on. But it fascinated me how our being, our mindset, our state, and what maybe we need to give to the world by showing how we can live differently. I was more comfortable at this point, and being able to be like, okay, this is where I'm at. but I can still show up in a way that's going to work for me. I don't need to be perfect. I don't need to hide. I don't need to think, oh, well, you haven't healed yourself in a specific way. Because that was my biggest block, Alexandra. It was, I almost didn't want to go out into the arena because I thought, well, people are going to be like, wow, she's not done X, Y, Z. Why is she like? And actually, I'm really grateful to some of the kind of spiritual teachers around me. One of them being Rebecca Campbell, actually, who wrote like,
yeah, she's a sweetheart. I know Beck.
such a lovely, and she kind of cornered me at one of her events and made me to an audience say, I think, you know, basically it's time for you to show up. It's okay as you are, like you know, and that was a real turning point for me. And once I'd kind of made that commitment, I was like, okay, this is the start. And once I did that, I started on the path. And it was liberating for me to be able to do that. And I'm not just talking to spirituality or any of the stuff that I've been talking about behind closed doors, but I'm sharing it, and people like it. And I think that's the perspective as well, that, you know, I'm inviting people in that maybe necessarily wouldn't look down that path, and it kind of opens those doorways. My friend, actually, George, who, you know, we talked about, almost I'm creating the bridge to help people cross over that bridge. And it's the bridge within us as well, because very often we can be having deep experiences and we don't always bridge them within ourselves. We don't always integrate things, because that can be quite a scary thing to do. Because it's, you know, it involves us peeling back deeper layers that we need to go into, and it involves us looking at our shadows, looking at the kind of darker side and not being afraid of it, and finding grace. And that's where it really came up for me, that when I moved into that later part of my journey, with this, especially with the spiritual stuff, I realized that it's not about being perfect, it's about finding grace. And there is no necessarily right way or right path. It's about walking the path within yourself and within the outside that will shift things and change things, and it will help other people to walk on their path rather than just walking on your path.
Oh, that was so beautifully put, honey. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. It's so true, isn't it? I think there's a kind of an unfoldment that happens when you sort of come into an acceptance of where you're at and can love yourself even in that, you know, no matter kind of what it is. You know, I think that there are a lot of people on the planet at the moment going through real hardships. And one of the things that I find is every story, every personal story is so different and so unique that it's almost like we're having to turn within, we're having to find that love and acceptance within ourselves in order to move through it. And some of it's downright traumatic for people. I mean, it must have been at that young age for you very traumatic to find out what was going on.
It was very traumatic. And I would say that definitely in those earlier years, when I was in that kind of darker stage, it took me a good 3 or 4 years to kind of wake up one day, and I kind of made a pact with myself, okay, if I cannot, you know, quote unquote, totally fix the physical, I do have control of my mind and beyond my mind. So I thought, I'm gonna go in for that. And that mind shift swap actually changed everything for me. And, you know, I think with trauma, the one thing that I've learned, even in the latter years, we're having to peel back what you said about people on the planet right now. We are carrying within our kind of being, our bones, our energy, like so much trauma that some of us have been carrying through lifetimes as well. And we need to kind of stop pinpointing and telling people they need to be fixed as well, I think, and realize they need to heal in the way that's right for them, and understand that what you said about being downright traumatic, like we need to honor that and actually not be afraid to say those words, because with the right intention behind things, we can bring up that darker stuff, and it can heal. It doesn't mean your vibration's going to go off, you know, it doesn't mean you're going to become less spiritual. And I think there's a lot of that goes around, that people often fear that if they look into things, or if they're thinking something negative, or if they're going through a darker stage, they're being less spiritual or attracting the wrong things. no, that's your feedback to look at your shadow. That's your feedback to go in to do that deeper healing. It's safe to do that, and we need to do that, because I think there's been a lot of surface plastering over, even within spirituality, where people haven't really been looking at things properly.
Oh, and if you don't look, it comes out the sides. The subconscious is getting more and more to the surface, isn't it? So it's prevalent. And I'm finding, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday or the day before, because I do, like you, a lot of deep shadow work, both on myself and with my clients. It's, there's nothing that's off limits. And I think it's actually really necessary. And what I'm finding, a colleague of mine said, it's really strange, like, the shadow work sort of takes you into this place where you'll feel energy between you and another person, and it can be downright weird, because sometimes it could be a person that you're very close friends with, but if there's a karma there that needs tidying up, you'll feel it and you'll be like, oh, what's this weird energy? And we have to not be afraid to go there. We have to be able to go into that transparent communication, own our stuff, and use the mirror and actually go in and have a look at what's going on. And some of it can be past life stuff that doesn't make any sense. So it can be downright weird, but it's also quite fun, I think, digging around in the shadows sometimes. You're like, oh, I did that? Wow.
Yeah. And I think as well, that's where grace needs to come into this. We kind of tend to think about grace as a very evangelical thing, or very kind of grace. Actually, grace can be found in those darker spaces. And I think it's realizing that when we invite an energy like grace into that darker space and into that stuff, actually it can help facilitate that space and make it feel safer. Because I think one of the kind of key things when people are moving on these journeys, without even realizing it, people don't feel safe. People don't always feel safe, even if they're in very kind of open spaces where they can speak to people. To really speak your truth sometimes, or what is down there, people don't always feel safe.
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes you need that support. And it's good to know that other people are kind of walking the talk as well, walking the path, walking the talk, like yourself. And you've been writing a book about your experiences, haven't you?
I have been.
Tell us a little bit about your book.
Yes. So it's I very much connected in number 13. Goddess number, like, for me, it's a very important, like, kind of movement of the energy, the kind of priestess cycle throughout the kind of year and the wheel. For me, that book is an integration of our darkness and light, and I take people through a journey in this book. It begins at the beginning of my journey using keywords: listening, surrender, healing isn't linear. And I take people on a journey through those 13 chapters, and the last 3 integrate that. And there's like a meditation that kind of fixes with those chapters as well. But it was interesting when I started to write that book. I actually had an experience where I'd gone to a Satnam Kaur concert, the chant lady, because I love chanting. It's been a medium I've used for years. And, because I do it all the time, you don't expect to have a kind of obscene healing reaction to something. And, I went along and I was kind of excited because I've done it by myself, or in the car with my mum, who doesn't know the words after 10 years still. So I went and I sang like I'd never sang before, because I didn't have to focus on the words, I knew them. And then I kind of woke up with the most horrendous tonsillitis that I hadn't had in a very long time. And at the same time as this, I was going home to finish, ready to submit this book to a workshop that I'd been to, that I was telling you about. And it was kind of the toughest week in my life, because I became very unwell. So I had to kind of sit in bed and write, and I had to kind of sit up, lie back down, write. I mean, it was an incredible process, but I realized there was so much stuck inside of me that, I guess it's shame, it's fear, it's all of those things that I said about that we want to try and gloss things over. I think I've always tried to make that, tried to be like, no, it's fine, don't worry. And that was me actually speaking those things that happened, and, realizing that it was difficult. And I think it was, it was almost like my body had prepared me to write those words. So it was showing me how stuck it was. And it made me realize, not just in this lifetime, but in other lifetimes, the kind of the throat, the voice suppression of the priestess, the witch, the energy and the codes I have carried in me through the lifetimes, that now, thankfully is the time where I'm able to show up in this life and really heal on those levels. And that for me has been, you know, it's kind of transformational when you can see that for what it is. And, you know, because I noticed every time I'd hear about kind of the witch hunts and anything like that, I would feel traumatized.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd experience, and I'd feel sick, and I thought, why is it so bad? And I realized, you know, this has been carrying in you a long time.
It is. And I think also with women, it's whether or not, you know, people watching this have had personal lifetimes, past lives as part of the witch hunts and the inquisitions and the heresy trials and things like that, we sort of carry it in our collective consciousness, don't we? So every woman is touched by this because it was kind of like a holocaust against women, really.
It is a holocaust. And not only that, our kind of the energy, what we don't realize as women with our throats, is really connected to our vaginas, and it's the same tissue in our throats, and
in shape and everything, isn't it?
Everything. And we do not realize that there is this direct connection between those places where, you know, the sexual repression that's not just been the witch hunts, the actual repression that we have carried collectively as women sexually. And we are right now, those wounds are obviously very open and kind of not even really began to heal, because there's so much that's coming up, but we are carrying that collectively. And that's why it's what, you know, I think it's that saying, isn't it, that when we heal, we help heal for others. And, you know, I think for anybody who could be struggling watching this and thinking, oh, you know, I just kind of feel I've done enough, or, you know, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing enough? You are. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're showing up to, I think it's remembering there is no right way, and what way you're doing it, honor that way, and stop questioning yourself all the time, because that again is something as women we carry in our consciousness, because that patriarchal energy has made us question the depth of who we are, our intuition. We were cut off from the head above, basically. And, you know, we need to remember that when, you know, a severed wound like that, you know, we need to call all that power back, call all that energy back. And I do that daily in meditation. I call back my power, call back my magic, call back the very essence of me. And, you know, we need to retrieve those lost pieces of us. And, you know, that's something we you know, we all can kind of do as well.
I find, and this is something you probably know about, I'd say yes, that the body is such a great teacher, isn't it? And the body and what we go through. I mean, you talking about the throat, but I mean, even with your disability, I mean, because I'm not sure if people aren't aware of Hannah, you are a wheelchair user as well, aren't you? So, I mean, this is it's been obviously one of your biggest challenges, but I'm imagining it's been your biggest teacher at the same time.
Absolutely. And interesting for me, when I started to use a wheelchair, I basically spent a long time not doing very much sometimes, always saying to people, oh, you go and do it, because I knew I couldn't. And I'm really grateful to a very quite narcissistic, aggressive ex-boyfriend who basically said when we were going to Rome one day, we need to take a wheelchair so you can actually like do this, we can enjoy this. And it was his kind of, I hope it's okay to swear.
Yeah, I swear all the time.
His fucking attitude actually really empowered me. And I do believe we meet people for the right and divine reasons. And definitely that was empowering for me, that he was like, who gives a fuck? People look at you. And that's kind of been the most empowering thing for me, that I think because, you know, in those first initial, I was kind of around him a lot. It really did stop making me give a fuck, basically. And I realized that, yes, you know, sometimes people are going to stare. It's curiosity. It's human. And also, I guess it's that thing that you look at someone and you don't imagine a person like the way I look to be in that wheelchair, and you think, what's happened? Or it's unanswered questions. So I think now when people stare, or if people are a bit odd with me, I know that it's not a reflection of me. And I know that sometimes it's all the kind of insecurities and triggers and stuff in them as well. And so I think it's giving people some grace there, because don't get me wrong, it is frustrating sometimes, but I also look how empowering that chair was for me. It gave me my life back. And that was something I cannot describe to people, to be able to go and do things that are much longer to do. Go out with your friends, go, like, I went around Paris with my sister and my best friend, and I still, to be honest, to this day now, I still get excited when I'm out with people. I'm like, I kind of took my power back there, and I think the resistance in me was the voice in my head saying, "Oh, that means you've failed, you've kind of given in," when I wasn't at all. And it actually was a positive thing, and I'm grateful too. There was an OT that I saw that said to me, "What is the problem here?" And I went,
yeah.
"Well, because I'm going to look more disabled." And she was like, "Maybe you just need to like own what's going on here." And she was like, should we say, very regular, the most regular person. But it was, sometimes we get that wisdom. The one thing I say to everybody, our wisdom, our angels, our guides talk through people. We're all expecting these kind of mass spiritual things to happen, aren't we? Like the angel to appear before us, or the guide. We have to remember they reach us in the best way they can, because we don't, as humans, have all these fear barriers. So I've always listened to that feedback the universe has given me through people. And I knew at that point, I was like, okay, I hear you.
I kind of see it as your chariot. It's like your golden chariot, darling.
Yeah.
You're coming in this ray of light. You're such a light. And one of the things I love about you is you're so open and genuine, and you just, you're so comfortable with yourself that you make it comfortable for other people.
Yeah.
That's it. It's like, as we know, if you're going to be a trigger or a mirror for someone, it's absolutely meant to be, isn't it? And it's something for them to go away and look at. But I think it's wonderful. It's so kind of courageous of you too, to start stepping out and speaking about your journey and writing about your journey and sharing your journey, because it's going to benefit so many people. I mean, even me listening to you is incredible, and it's sort of putting a lot of my own stuff into perspective as well. I hear you about the body. I mean, the body for me, I've been on a big fertility journey, which I've spoken about on this show before, and it has in many ways not linked to this life in a lot of ways. I've had to go right back through many past lives of trauma as a woman, as we spoke of. Yeah. But in that way, the body has been my biggest teacher, and it's all been around womb trauma and sexual trauma and things like that. And I used to get asked all the time by healers, "Oh, have you been abused?" And I was like, well, not really in this life, not to that degree. And it was all past life stuff, but the body's been telling the story, and it's been helping me move through those layers. And speaking to you, I just find you such an inspiration, because it does kind of help you understand that in that acceptance, in that grace, you can let go, and you can start to allow for whatever is coming in, and just open to something else, something different in a way.
And what you said about birthing earlier, I mean, I think as women, our wombs, again, it's where most of us are disconnected from. And this is not something that we're taught in school, is it? And it's not something...
Not in Catholic school, that's for sure.
No. Well, no. And yeah, exactly. And I think, if there's anything as a woman that we can go forward and do, is to begin that journey to heal our womb spaces. Get to know her, connect to her. And, well, like what you said, when you're going through things like fertility trauma and stuff, it is deeply painful, because when we carry that within us and from other lifetimes, it hurts. It's like a gash, isn't it? Like a wound and it's hard to find grace, because if we look at the mother wound and we look at the links with that, it can really test us and challenge us. And I've seen this with some people around me as well, and a very good friend of mine who had totally let go on her fertility journey, to the point where she'd never, it literally had given up, actually has just had a baby. So
that's amazing.
She didn't have a period for 4 years.
Wow. Well, it's so funny with me. I mean, I often get the message, it's a timing thing. And I know it's because I've got work to do here. And I almost, in many ways, have had to birth the book before I birthed the children. And, there's I'm 42 now. There's a part of me that's like, well, are they, they may not come. I may not have children in this lifetime. And I've sort of come into an acceptance of that. But that said, every time I surrender it, and every time I kind of go, okay, well, maybe it's not happening, they show up. they show up, I get the signs, it pops into
Yeah.
conversation. So it's still, the jury is out. But again, it's the grace, isn't it? I think I've come to a place of grace with it now. It's like, life's pretty good at the moment. I'm going to just love where I'm at, who I am, how I am, and take it. I think we need to come to a place where we find that balance, that place of almost neutrality in whatever's going on in our lives.
Absolutely.
And I think
Neutrality.
that's the bit that you were talking about, right? That finding the center in the midst of all the ups, downs, the work.
Finding the center. And actually, funnily enough, I was with them in the summer. I was with my sister and a friend, and they went, "Oh, she's going to talk about neutrality too." We were talking about she's going to get on the neutrality thing, and because they knew, and that's the thing. Neutrality is the place where we when we sit and we can hold that space. It becomes like part of that spiral. It becomes around us, and we can kind of balance those two things rather than it's stopping the fight, essentially. And I think that, it's trust as well. It's deep divine trust. Most of us in this lifetime and in other lifetimes have had major trust issues. People have trust issues from with their families. It is something that is, a deep-rooted issue. And if you think about trust, that is a major thing that reconnects us to where we need to be. So it's reconnecting with trust, and that is a long process for most people, because people, if you ask somebody, generally they'll say, "Well, I'm a trusting person," but do you trust yourself?
Do you trust yourself?
Do you really trust yourself? Do you really trust your body? Do you trust your womb space? Do you trust your vagina? Do you trust your heart? Because I think as well, when it comes to trust, we then instantly put this barrier up of being worried to fail, or we might break somebody's trust. And I think it's remembering that we aren't perfect. We are, we've chosen to come into these human bodies, and it's about actually finding grace with trust and knowing that it is going to not be something you can't be perfect at it. And it's coming to terms with that as well, because I think because we carry these codes of, distrust and betrayal, we want to become these perfect, trusting humans. And it's really kind of navigating and redefining trust as well. And when we start to do that, we begin to trust ourselves on a different level, and we trust our bodies on a different level. And we invite our soul into trust as well. We invite ourselves to trust the forces beyond, that are around us. And, they become more present to us when we start to trust in a different way.
That is so beautifully put. You're so articulate. I love the way you speak, honey.
Oh, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit on that note about your podcast and how you got started with that?
So I started my my website and my blog, and I did have this niggling to do a podcast, and I just thought I want to be able to create these conversations with some authors that I knew and people, and go in there and have those sacred conversations, but not just with authors, but with people with a story. So there is a guy on the podcast who we got divinely, we kind of got to know each other through a friend, and he was a wakeboarder, a model, very masculine, patriarchal, sexual man, basically. And he had an accident which left him a quadriplegic.
Oh, wow.
And to be able to share his story was amazing.
Wow.
So I wanted to create these conversations, and I sat with it for a while, and then a friend of mine who is just a machine of doing basically said, "Right, you need to do this podcast now. Come on, you need to do it. I'm going to be your first guest." And I was like, okay. So yeah, and then I started to reach out to people, and I thought, oh, I hope, I didn't really know kind of how the response was going to be, but it's been brilliant. And it's been really nice to sometimes get different perspectives and actually like begin this conversation that's slightly outside of the box of like regular kind of spirituality, and talk about people's own, find out about them more as well, because behind the books, behind the face of people, there's a story that is deeper within them, and there's their kind of
Yeah.
their stuff, not just what someone is writing in a book, what someone is putting out to the world, because essentially, there is so much more to us than what we're putting, there's layers of, and I think it was for me to be able to share that. So yeah, it's been good to consistently show up and do that. And
it's really beautiful. I think we're coming into this beautiful time on the planet where people do want to connect more at that human level, even though we've got the mobile phones and everything, and people are kind of doing this. There's more and more people that I think are really craving and needing that human soul connection, and that understanding that you don't have to be perfect at everything. We've all been kind of trying to live in this way that just isn't true or sustainable or authentic or human in a way. Like, we're not all robots that can just, go and do everything to perfection. And in a way, everything we do is perfection anyway, because we're all divine. So,
and I mean, for instance, talking about that, there are some things I haven't edited out podcast. For instance, I got a phone call during actually our friend George, and I laughed because when I could see that, I thought I turned everything off, and it was actually the NHS calling me. And I said, I'm going to leave this in here because it shows people the NHS do call people.
They do actually get back to you. That's good to know.
They do call people back. And I think it's about being okay with showing up, not having to be perfect. I mean, and if we have a blemish, or if we don't feel quite right, or we do feel, not our best.
Yeah, like me fiddling with the lighting before this began. It's like, what's the right lighting?
Who made these rules? What I say to people is, who made the rules? Like, it fascinates me how we have to deconstruct, where do we get those stories from? And I say this to people when they say, well, I'm like this, I don't think I'm capable of change. But where did you get that from in the first place? Because we get everything from the people around us, our kind of families, our things. When we start to ask ourselves, who am I? What do I really believe? Most of us at the core, until we've explored that, do not know. Or we feel very kind of disconnected from that because we've never had to ask ourselves that question. Because as a child, we're kind of taught how we're meant to be. And if anybody does try to not conform, it's kind of tries to be squashed, doesn't it, essentially?
There's a lot of kind of backlash at the moment too, isn't there? There's, people asking for more kind of gender neutral categories in award ceremonies and things like that, which I think is wonderful. But then at the same time, there's people who are all like, what's going on? There's such a, but I feel like coming back to the throat and everything, it's all about expressing ourselves in our own unique way. You should be free to be whoever you are, to express yourself in whatever way you need to, even if it is completely out there and bonkers to some people. Some people's bonkers is another person's normal, isn't it? So
absolutely. And I think one of the things in society, like when all this Me Too stuff comes out and all the sexual repression, I think because the trigger is so difficult, people often don't want to speak about what's going on inside of them, or if maybe they have an idea, a thought, or a fantasy, and this ends up manifesting, and it has done over hundreds of years, as we know, to a level of brutality. And I think that when people are open enough to have those conversations with each other, I was thinking about this, and someone hears you without shame and holds that space and says, do you know what, that's a bit weird, it's not for me, but I hear you. You've instantly kind of decreased the kind of, you've brought some grace into it, because it's not about everybody, as you say, being into something weird or something different. But I think people are afraid, and people are afraid of different, and people are afraid of the kind of unspoken things, yet people have the thoughts in their head. People have, and it gets so squashed down within us that it manifests in some quite negative ways in society. And I think as humans, we need to bring in, especially with the feminine, we need to have those kind of more difficult conversations around sexuality, around what you say with trauma, with sex, and ask ourselves these questions. Why are people behaving in certain ways, and what's happening here? Because the bottom line of it is, we know that a balanced human or a balanced person would not be kind of doing that anyway. This is lifetimes and years of, well, look at family secrets, all the things that are carried through us. And what you said about a collectiveness, that's between men and women, isn't it? Not just even what women are carrying.
Absolutely. It's like it's like a societal wound in a way, isn't it? That all
Massively.
of us have a part in healing, really.
Massively. And to kind of not be afraid to have a difficult conversation with somebody, because honestly, something I really think that very often, if we can speak something, when it comes back to the threat, if we can speak something out, and we know that even if we're saying something that quote unquote could be seen as wrong or, you know, terrible, sometimes just the voicing of that is part of the healing process.
It's
And
huge.
it
Yeah.
changes everything, because in a way you've taken your power back and you've said it, and it no longer has a hold over you. It doesn't seem as appealing. And I think that again is, well, you know, this is spiritual, this is every kind of base topic. We need to kind of start bringing that voicing into it.
Absolutely. It could be quite subtle too. I wrote a poem recently that was about abuse, and how abuse can be really subtle, and how it actually, you know, one of the things that I experienced as an empath was how much it was like blaring me in the face recently, how much I have enabled people to abuse me, however subtly, over the years, through bullying at school and all of those things. And even I found subtleties within my own relationship, you know, and within friendships that I had overlooked by trying to be nice, or kind of thinking, if I upset the apple cart, that I'll, you know, ruin everything. But I think that's part of, you know, we're finding our voice, we're becoming more authentic, we're speaking our truth with transparency and not being afraid to do that. I mean, I've seen, you know, since I started on the path of doing all the shadow work, which, you know, began for me something like 10 years ago in a major way, the speaking of truth has upset the apple cart quite a lot in a number of areas in my life, but to a positive end. So, you know, you might find that the friendships that are not serving you will move out of your life, but you'll make new friends that are more heart-centered.
Absolutely.
And those people will meet you. You know, the right people of the right vibration, the vibrational match to you, will come in and either be the mirror or the support or the catalyst or whatever you need at any given time. But it's so telling, like when you really open your eyes and start to look at all the facets of your life, you hold yourself accountable too. You know, I was like, well, you know, I'm not the victim here. I've been sort of enabling a lot of this behavior and overlooking it and having to own that. So
That's exactly, and I mean, I've had that in personal relationships as well, and I think very often, well, it's our love relationships can very much show that up, can't they? And we really have to be brave enough almost to be like, okay,
yeah,
let's take a closer look at this and be okay with ourselves during that process. But I think in all of this, when we come back to the throat, we need to call back our power to our voice and keep doing it, even though the process has started. We can't stop now. I do think that the kind of, we've opened Pandora's box, and it's good. It's, you know, shadowy. It's difficult sometimes, but it is good. And you know, the only, you know, we can look at it, you have to move through things. And I do think that as well, like we often get so caught up in fear that we feel stuck, and it's not that we're stuck, we're almost afraid to walk through, we're afraid to move through it because we don't know what's on the other side, essentially. But we don't need to, because we know that what's going to be on the other side is going to be good, essentially, and it will serve us and support us in the right way that we need.
I love that. Hannah, have you got any advice for people on how they can sort of come into that place of neutrality a little bit more easily, so they can be a little bit kinder to themselves and sort of find that place of grace within them a little bit more easily? Is there a process that you tend to use?
Yes. What I would say, like initially, I think the most important thing, what I said to you about calling back our power, is to also remember that even if you're on a kind of a very deep spiritual journey, get grounded to Mama Earth, get grounded. And daily, I do that to myself. I have a process where I get grounded, I connect kind of the elements of earth, fire, using that energy to clear myself, because I think before we can come to a place of neutrality, we need to make sure that we've kind of cleared ourselves on that level and we are grounded. And next, what I would say about finding grace is what I said to you about find those safe people that you can deeply share with. And I was having this conversation on one of my podcasts with Sophie Bashford. And we were just saying it's so important to find those, sometimes it's one or two people who you can bear it all, because once you're doing that, you will be able, you're releasing those things on a very safe level. And it's, it needs to be a safe person, someone who you literally could, blurt it all out and they're just going to be like, okay, it's fine.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's cool. And I think that is how you begin to find your way back to neutrality. That's the begin, because once you've that trust that you're creating, that bond, it starts bringing you back within, because you think, if I can do that, how can I now go inside of myself? So I think it's initially, aside from grounding yourself, moving yourself into that space where you have good people around you, just one or two that you can share, and bring yourself to come back to yourself. And then what you'll gradually start to find as you go out into your life, how you voice things and how you do things, and you use your discernment, will start to change. And I think when you say about being kinder to yourself, I think it's about being okay with mucking up, being okay with the fact you could have done a whole process, you could have prepared yourself for the day, you could have meditated, you could have done all the good things, and then it goes wrong. Not beating yourself up, and practice that. Make it a practice. Like we talk about like having a spiritual practice, make it a practice that when you mess up, or you feel you haven't done right, or I just can't surrender this, and you're beating yourself up, make it a practice to look at that and be okay. This is just feedback. And
especially
I think
in Mercury retrograde, which is what we're in while we're filming.
Absolutely. And remembering that whatever is happening in your life is giving you some level of feedback. And when we can start to look at it like feedback, even if it's not the feedback we want, it's giving us a message. And it allows us to start creating this dialogue with ourselves and with the world around us, because we're beginning to listen to that feedback within us and what's going on the outside, and we can start to weave them together. And that's where we can bring grace in, because we start to, like I said about stopping the fight, we're no longer having that kind of battle. And so that would be what I would say, to be kinder to ourselves, that people need to do. And also just be compassionate. I mean, it's funny that, we're promoting kindness, positivity, but are we compassionate to ourselves? No. And I think we're hard on ourselves if we don't think we're motivated enough. So we're already creating all these blocks. And then when you try and be kind and passionate, you've got all these blocks in the way anyway. So it's really stripping it back and being like, I'm going to meet myself where I'm at. And I think one of the key things that we need to learn to do is meet ourselves where we're at, and not be afraid of that, and not try to be, I need to be a better version. I'm going to meet myself. I'm going to see her. I'm going to see him. I'm going to see they. I'm going to hold that within myself and integrate that within myself.
I love it. It reminds me of I saw a quote on Instagram this morning, and I was like, oh God, this is so true. And it was something like, she knew she could, but she was too tired, so she decided that she wouldn't, and that it would all be okay tomorrow, and that it would all happen tomorrow. It's like, oh, that's me. Some mornings you're like, no, I'm not getting up going for a run this morning, or no, I'm not going to bother checking my email for a day. I'm sure it's going to be fine. That being so tough on ourselves to strive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's like with, I think, nutrition, anything. I mean, I know for me that was a big part of the kind of obsession of being obsessed that if I didn't do XYZ, it was all going to, and it's been a real kind of learning process for me over the years. And God, don't get me wrong, as soon as, we all have those capabilities within us, as soon as something triggers up, we can find those old behaviors or creep back in. And it's about saying, do you know what, that's not for me anymore. And just letting it go and being kind. Okay, you're giving me feedback. And just, I love that quote because it's so true. And, that's definitely something I'm like, I failed. I should have done this today. It wasn't on my list that I didn't tick it off. Actually, I say thank you for giving me another opportunity to be able to show up and do this in the right way tomorrow. It clearly wasn't meant to happen today, and it's enabled me to do something else. Or it's enabled me, if you're feeling like you're being lazy, it's enabled me to kind of really enjoy this laziness, so I don't have to continue the laziness, because I've allowed myself to truly enjoy it. Because that's the thing, we fight against this idea of doing nothing. We fight against this idea of that we're not showing up enough, we're not hustling enough, we're not doing this, that, and the other. We need to give ourselves permission to breathe. And I look across the board on Instagram and all the kind of social platforms, people are constricted, and they're constricted around here and in their womb spaces, and we need to breathe. We need to create that. I call it the 25%, and I say to my friend who's a big hustler, I say, you need to pull back 25%. If you think that you're running like that, pull back and create that space and allow things to come into that space without you pushing, without the kind of struggle. And that's really hard for people to do, because it's, you're having to take your hands off the wheel, so to speak. You're having to take less control. And that feels scary, especially if we feel we've worked hard for something, especially if we feel we're nailing something. But actually, to go fully the full way, we need to invite that surrender in for it to really move forward in a kind of that bigger way.
Oh, I love that. Hannah, how can people find you? Have you got a website that we can guide them to?
Yes, so it is www.hannah-wallace.com. And through that website, I've got my blog posts. You can listen to my podcast via the website, iTunes or Spotify. And I've also got a little section called Hannah's Loves, which just encourages things that I like, things that I use. And if you sign up to my email list, there's actually a grounding, centering meditation. It's basic, but it's to soothe the soul. I look at something like that as a little bit of medicine, and we all need a little bit of daily medicine. And
every little helps, isn't it? It doesn't have to be big and complex either, does it? I find the simple things sometimes are the most effective and the most powerful.
Absolutely. And it's remembering that medicine comes in all forms. And I think we often forget that. We get very specific on how we think our medicine should come. And it's remembering that it's taking a step back and understanding that it can come in many forms and many ways. And when we open our eyes and our ears and our senses beyond, that medicine is everywhere. But, we get so fixed on how it should be that we forget that.
I love it. It's beautiful. Hannah, you're such an inspiration. Thank you so much for speaking to me today. One last question before we go. Obviously, you yourself are inspiring for others and out there being, a spokesperson and helping people to heal through your knowledge and your work. Who inspires you? Who are the people that inspire you the most?
So actually, on a basic level, it is probably the friends and the people around me, the humans around me that have loved me and supported me throughout the entire journey, when they've had no a lot of them are, were very different, but they have loved me fiercely, and they have held those dark spaces and been there and not questioned it. And that inspires me deeply. And having a family that has as well. But on another level, when I was 19, I read Conversations with God. And it was funny because it was given to me by a kind of therapist I was seeing, and I was like, oh, why do I want to read a book about God? Thinking he was giving me a religious book. And he was like, trust me, read the book. So I went away and I read the book. And that book for me was a real game changer for me, because I realized I could change the dialogue and begin this dialogue in a very different way with God, with source, with however you want to call it. And when I was reading I read the 3 books, I didn't even remember doing this, but there must have been a bit in it where you would call in something that you'd like. What do you really want? So I must have written peace. Now I forgot about this and put it in a pot. And many years later, I went to India with my mum, and it was kind of a very spiritual experience for me. It was something I'd kind of envisioned since I was 5, to go to the Taj Mahal. So
can't describe it, can you?
no,
I mean, no picture can.
no picture can describe it. So my mum's, that was hilarious. She said, you know, when we pulled up there, she was like, well, dear, I hope this is going to be everything you've wanted. And I was like, I'm ready for it. And I got there, and I was I didn't have an electric wheelchair there. I had a guide pushing me, and I just started to sob. And luckily it was like I had sunglasses on, thank God, because I didn't, the poor guy would have thought, oh no, I've done something wrong. So my mum's gone off into the tomb, which I couldn't get into. It was too much of an access issue. So I said, you go, tell me about it, you know. And I knew why I'd sent her away, because I had to have that experience. I saw everything flash in front of me. And I was, you know, this poor guy's behind me oblivious, and I am there with tears streaming down my face under the very dark glasses, thankfully, thinking, oh my goodness. And I felt this massive, like a weight lift off me. So my mum comes back and says, oh, you know, have you been crying? And I said, yeah, I'm just having a spiritual experience, Mum. She's like, okay, dear, you carry on. And so I did. And after that felt, you know, I knew that I'd come home. I knew I'd meant to be in that place. And then when I returned to the UK, I'd had this pot, which I carried this pot from how, you know, the house we'd moved. And I thought I'd always put money in it and always managed to siphon the money out of it, as you do over the years when you need a tenner or a pound. And I thought, I'm going to knock, this pot's got to go. I'm going to knock this pot. And in this pot, I'd written from conversations with God, basically a declaration of what I wanted, and it was about peace. Yeah. And I looked at that and I realized, and I sobbed, because I thought, the funny thing is, that's what I got on this. I did come to a place of peace. And it's funny, because I assumed I would have written for money, or, you know, all the things that we assume, love, money, but actually it was peace. And the best bit of the story is that 2 weeks later, I then met Neil. And the best thing about it was that the actual event that was organised by Alternatives never happened, because there was a problem with his visa, so he was stuck.
Oh, you're
but
kidding.
Then on the Monday, they invited anybody that could come, so only 15 of us could turn up for a personal audience with him. Ooh. And I knew it was divine timing, and it felt like a big circle had come. And I think it's for us to remember that sometimes when we let go and we surrender, the answers don't always come to us in the way we're going to imagine. And sometimes it can come very much later as well, when we fully let go and we're getting on with our lives and we're just going along and we're moving forward, and to live. The biggest thing I've learned on this journey is to live. Choose joy. You don't have to be doing all the time. Choose life. Choose to like live and love, and to know you don't have to be doing every process under the sun all the time, that actually you can, you know, truly live. And when you start that dialogue with yourself, that's when everything changes.
It certainly does. Oh, my darling, what an amazing conversation we've had. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. Thank you so much for all your beautiful, open-hearted insights and inspiration and words of encouragement for everybody. It's so funny, everyone. I'm sitting here looking at her, and her aura is bouncing off her head in white light. So I'm like looking at all the orbs and energies around you, like beautiful. But you've got this huge like halo around your head that I can see, which is stunning, sort of white, and then at the very outer edge, violet. Beautiful. And that's the colour you're wearing too. So
yeah, I know. And I was very guided to wear, I was going to wear my grey jumper, and this morning I got, no, you need to wear the purple.
Yeah. Oh, it's gorgeous. So, wow. Well, we have a spiritual master among us. And, you know, the way you speak is just so clear and open and eloquent and pure heart. So I love it. Thank you so much for sharing with us so openly and beautifully. And yeah, this is probably one of my favorite interviews that I've done for a very long time, so thank you.
It's my pleasure. And yeah, I hope whoever this reaches, I hope it gives them some medicine. I hope this conversation is a little bit of medicine that somebody needs to hear.
Yeah, I feel it is the energy of grace. You are the epitome of grace. Thank you so much, honey. And so for those of you watching, tune into Hannah's podcast, check out her blog. And just for the viewers again, it's hannah-wallace.com. Thank you so much, honey. I wish I could give you a hug through the screen. We'll have to meet up.
Hugs through the screen, definitely.
Thank you. And for all of you watching, thank you so much for watching the Alexandra Wenman Show.